Back in the heart of Quebec is the Place d'Armes. It's just in front of the Chateau Frontenac. The old town of Quebec has been listed as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. That's the significance of this interesting sculptural monument behind me. And further behind me you see the beautiful Chateau Frontenac. There's probably no other hotel in the world that's more symbolic of its city than the Chateau Frontenac is symbolic of Quebec. It's the grand old dame of the city, that's for sure. It was first built in the 1890s by the Canadian Pacific Railroad. They built a whole series of ultra-luxury hotels like this across Canada. We've already seen the Banff Springs Hotel, and there's the Chateau Lake Louise, all part of that same chain built by the railroad to encourage people to travel and to take care of them when they were using the train system. Today it's a very expensive hotel if you travel during the season, but if you go in the off-season in the late fall and in the winter time, early spring, it's quite affordable. It might cost you $160 a night for the room at that time. But in the summer, you're looking at maybe $340 a night for a room, and the breakfast buffet is open to the public, so come on down even if you're staying nearby and have breakfast by all means. That's a reasonable fee, maybe $16 for a wonderful buffet breakfast. And they have a whole bunch of shops in their lobby and a great location on the bluff overlooking the lower town. Right next to the Chateau Frontenac is the Governor's Garden, which was originally laid out back in the 17th century in the British style. It's a beautiful square garden with some very ancient homes all around it. And on the other side, the Chateau Frontenac, and then a beautiful obelisk, the Governor's Garden. This quaint historic neighborhood behind the Chateau Frontenac also has some nice little hotels, and this is where we'll be staying in our upcoming tour of Canada. We're up at the Citadel, which is a fortress on a hill overlooking the old town of Quebec. It's a massive star-shaped fortress that was originally conceived back in the 17th century, but the present structure was constructed in the 1820s and 1830s, and it's done in a classical French style of star-shaped double-wall fortification. They never did have to use it in battle, but it was here to protect the city anyway. Quebec was always very concerned about their self-defense because, after all, it was very turbulent in the early days of Quebec, the French fighting the British, finally the British reigning supreme, and then the American colonies fighting back and threatening Quebec, actually attacking Quebec on occasion to incorporate Canada into America. So therefore, they have this violent historical past and felt the need for this massive fortification. Today, the Citadel is one of the oldest occupied military garrisons in the world because it still is an active army fort. So it's really quite an amazing historic site, and from the top of this hill you have a fabulous view looking out over the town of Quebec. The St. Lawrence River in the background, and you can see the towering castle, the Chateau Frontenac, and some of the very old homes of this ancient town of Quebec. The Ursuline Monastery is the oldest girls' school in North America. It was founded in the 1640s, and it's still in operation today. It's a very historic site. Many important things happened here, but it's most famous as being the oldest girls' school in the Americas. And just a few blocks away is the Anglican Cathedral, which was the first British church built in Canada. It was constructed around 1804. And it's built in the Palladian style, modeled somewhat after St. Martin in the Fields Church in London on Trafalgar Square. It's 30 yards long and 20 yards wide. The bell tower is 50 yards high. There's the old City Hall. Some more views of the streets of old Quebec. The history of Quebec continued after the British took over in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. Quebec became a very important trading center because the river narrowed at this point, and to get any further into the country, you really couldn't go up the river. You had to go overland. and therefore Quebec became the main port of entry for all of Canada. Another one of the typical restaurants. This is a French restaurant. The French influence is still so strong in Quebec City, even though the British took control in 1763, 250 years ago. The people still speak French today. So in some ways it's more of a French culture than a British culture. Of course, it's an independent nation, obviously. Canada is a sovereign land, and many of the people here do speak English as well, so it's really easy for the traveler to get by. Not a problem with the language when you're in Canada, even when you're in Quebec. But that French culture is a wonderful element of your visit here, especially when it comes to the French cuisine. Quebec has been a capital city for the longest time. It was the capital of New France. All of the territory that France controlled in North America was ruled right here from Quebec. And it was also the capital of Canada at first under the British. Very important trading city, economic and political center. However, by 1859, Montreal had become more important than Quebec, and the political focus shifted to Montreal, and at that point, Quebec was no longer the national capital. And with the advent of steamships earlier in the 19th century, Quebec no longer became the important harbor gateway because steamships could go past Quebec all the way up to Montreal, up the St. Lawrence River. So Quebec sort of got left behind and has been preserved today as a historic gem for the visitor to go and enjoy. Quebec City, a most historic place. It's the only walled city in North America, and it has the best preserved historic old town in all of North America. It's really something to see. We're going to bring you on a walking tour with a local guide who will point out sites such as this fortress on top of the hill, the Citadel, a remarkable building. One of the gates in the wall that goes around the town. This is the oldest commercial street in North America, Rue de Petit Champlain. We'll be showing you all of these sites in great detail as our program unfolds here in Quebec City. Let's see if I can give you a 1-minute summary of why Quebec is so interesting. First of all, there's fascinating little shops and quaint old buildings and a big castle of a hotel, the Chateau Frontenac, and other nice hotels to stay in and great restaurants. This unusual statue signifies it's been designated a World Heritage City by UNESCO because of the large number of old historic buildings that are still standing here. Quebec was first settled back in the early 1600s, discovered by Cartier, settled by Champlain. It was a French community for 150 years. There's our quaint little hotel that we're staying at. We're walking over to the Chateau Frontenac for a delicious breakfast while I tell you quickly the rest of the history of Quebec. French for 150 years, taken over by the British for 150 years, and then became an independent country of Canada in the mid-19th century. This rich historical mix is still alive today. For example, 98% of the people here speak French, and the city is filled with quaint old historic buildings. And now we're going to take you through some more of the interesting shops in the district of Petit Champlain. Also has some very old restaurants. This is reputed to be the oldest restaurant in town, and I certainly enjoyed their outdoor terrace garden. You're going to find the cuisine of Quebec is heavily influenced by the French history and culture. So come take a stroll with us for a few minutes through this delightful area of the lower town of Old Quebec. We're actually outside the walled part of the city in the Petit Champlain Street, but this is very much the oldest part of town. This is where the first fort was built back in 1608 by Champlain, and people have been living here and eating here ever since. French artisans moved in the 1680s, and then Irish dock workers lived here, and it became kind of a rowdy neighborhood for a while, and now it's been all rejuvenated as one of the most sparkling historic sites in North America. You can get back up to the upper town by funicular, as you see here. That's the easy way to go. It costs about $1. Or you could walk. Well, that completes our tour of Quebec. All we have left to do now is find a restaurant this evening and enjoy one more delicious meal in Quebec before moving on to our next city with World Traveler. Next morning, we are on our way once again back to the train station by taxi, heading on to the next city in our tour of Canada, which is going to be Montreal. This is part of our train tour of Canada with the Hawaii Geographic Society. We started out in Victoria, over in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. Then we toured Vancouver, and then we traveled from Vancouver into the heart of the Rockies by train on the Rocky Mountaineer. We toured the Banff area, Moraine Lake, Lake Louise, Emerald Lake, and then crossed over to Quebec where we enjoyed our historic tour. And now the pleasures of first-class rail, gliding across the countryside, enjoying the scenery out the window, being served a nice meal on board. How about that old town of Quebec?
Yes, very nice. In fact, I think that's my favorite city, Quebec.
It was certainly interesting. We were there 25 years ago and it brought back a lot of memories, particularly the plains of Abraham and General Wolfe beating Montcalm and both of them dying on the battlefield on that particular day. I think it was a big day of history for England and France.
It just has a charm that's hard to beat. Wonderful place for tourists to visit.
I loved Quebec.
That walking tour in Quebec, that was something, huh?
Oh yes, that was really nice.
Yep.
Yeah, I recommend it highly.
Yeah, I like Quebec very much.
I loved returning to Quebec. The Frontenac Hotel is magnificent. Breakfast was delicious. I loved the old city. It was very, very interesting.
I think it's all been wonderful, the whole trip, from the minute we started, and looks like it's going to be that way till we end up back home.
It's that way, doesn't it?
Quebec I really liked. It's picturesque, charming.
It's Paris with all the charm, without the attitude. It's really a beautiful place.
Quebec is like a little piece of Europe plopped down in North America, waiting for you to come and discover it. As we make our way to Montreal. However, we'll save Montreal for another program because we're just about out of time here on today's World Traveler program. We'll just give you a quick preview of our visit to Montreal. We stay at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, which is right in the center of town at the train station, so it's a very convenient place, very big, beautiful hotel. And we'll be showing you the sights of the city, the shopping areas, the historic areas. We'll bring you into the old town of Montreal and show you all around, as we always do with World Traveler.